presentation that I have worked really hard on because I love vintage computing. I love the Commodore Amiga, and it is, I feel like not a lot of people here in the States know about it, right? You find a lot of people who know about the Commodore Amiga, and they're usually from Europe. They're usually from outside the States. But hi, welcome in.
Thank you.
Hello. So, first of all, my name is Ash. I go online by Ash Said Hi. And I play a lot of Commodore Amiga and vintage games, retro games as you might call it, on the internet, whether that's on Twitch, YouTube, you know, wherever they'll allow me to play video games online. And for reference, if anybody's curious, I also brought this is not the full version of the Amiga, this is the Amiga Mini, kind of like how they have like a Super Nintendo Mini and a NES Mini. These are, I think at this point, probably a little bit harder to find than when it came out about 2 years ago, but they're still out there. They're still out there on the Amazon. So I submitted this panel because I wanted people to learn about the Commodore Amiga, the friend you didn't know you had, because even though they stopped making, well, the company kind of went defunct in the mid-90s, it's still around. It still persists. It's still there. So the Commodore Amiga, I'm going to read from my notes because I wrote some good notes and I want y'all to know everything that I know. So the Commodore Amiga, a computer light years ahead of its time, is often overlooked in the United States, even though it had impact in movies, music, art, gaming. It developed, here in the US, but it was wildly more popular in Europe, and it's been used for a lot more than gaming, you know? I mean, although I will say some of my favorite games are on this thing, it has been used for so much more. We're going to explore all of that in the next, I want to say about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. So, yeah, let's take a deep dive into unearthing all the ways the Commodore Amiga was a part of our lives without us even knowing. From the video toaster, which I'll tell you all about, because you'll probably be like, what the heck is a video toaster? Being used in TV and major films, to the demo scene and trackers being used in DJ sets. Also tell you about trackers and demo scenes. So let's get into the role the Commodore Amiga played in pop culture and how it continues to live strong even to today. So look at this awesome picture, and just in case you're wondering, that one's me. The other person in the picture is one of my very good friends, Amiga Bill, and the reason why I used this picture was, it was the first picture I found with me and an Amiga, and I wanted people to be able to see what it was. But also, the reason why I use this photo is because the community around the Amiga is what keeps it alive today. And even though they don't make Commodore Amigas anymore, like officially, the community is still very strong. And in fact, Amiga Bill, who has been running the Westchester Amiga user group since 1985, still runs meetings to this day, every first Thursday of the month. So that means a new meeting is coming up in a couple of weeks, so I gotta remember to go. But the community is what keeps it strong, and in fact, there's gonna be a 40-year anniversary celebration of the Amiga in Germany and in Silicon Valley. So if this thing piques your interest and you're like, yo, I wanna go check out this demo scene, you got events to go to and you got things to see. And people still stream this stuff on Twitch, they make videos on YouTube, like it's awesome. So I can't wait to tell you all about it. And, if you're wondering why I can even talk about this in the first place, I am an Amiga enthusiast. I learned all about this stuff because of my dad. He had an Amiga, I inherited his Amiga, and he showed me all the games, and then just through learning from other people and like playing it myself and just being around the community, I've just picked up so much knowledge, and I want to share it because, again, another thing about the community, preservation in retro gaming is extremely important. So if we don't preserve these things, the disk rot is going to eat it away, they're going to get lost. We don't want that to happen because there's a lot of cool technology here. So if you're coming to this panel and you're like, Hey, yo, Ash, I don't even know what the Commodore Amiga is. I don't know why I'm sitting here. I'm just trying to get away from the noise. You know, like, that's cool. Sit here, hang out. I hope you learned something new. You are so welcome to be here. But I hope we can pique your interest on what the Commodore Amiga is. So, it's a personal computer produced by Commodore in the US in the mid-1980s through the mid-1990s. So, they started in 1985. The first Amiga was the Amiga 1000, and then they came out with the 500 after. I don't know why they did that naming nomenclature. You know, the 1000 was the first one, and it had some really sick hardware. You know, some really cool hardware. A lot of it was custom, and you know, made it unique to produce. So, but we're going to get more into that later. And if you're wondering what OCS, ECS, and AGA means, it's the chipset. It's what makes the visuals do what they do. It's what makes the hardware able to do what it does. And you'll find out that it does all kinds of really cool stuff. So the OCS means original chipset, ECS means enhanced chipset, and AGA is advanced graphic architecture. So that's basically like when you look at the graphics, when you're playing a game, you're like, oh, okay, that's why it looks so awesome. They played the best games via floppy disks. So for anybody who knows what a floppy disk is, if you've ever, you know, for anybody younger who's, you know, used Microsoft Word, you're like, is that the same icon? It's a floppy disk. That's where it comes from. The floppy disk is, it's like a square piece that you put inside, usually the A drive, and the Amiga has one. You can also daisy chain more than one on there, so you didn't have to do what we call swapping disks. Yeah, thank you for that laugh. Yeah, that's how you play the games. And there were some games like, I think, Dragon's Lair, or the other game that was made by the same company, they had sometimes upwards of like 8 to 10 discs to swap. Eye of the Beholder, one of my favorite games, had, I believe, like 4 or 6. Dungeon Master had 3, and you know, you get up to a certain part of the game and be like, okay, enter disc 2, and then you gotta swap. Anybody who's played PlayStation 1 games also know you had to do the disc swap back in the day, so yeah, shout outs to retro gaming. So it is capable of video editing, photo editing, 3D modeling, desktop publishing, animation, gaming, all of this. And this was back, like I said, in 1984, 1985, and we were doing 3D modeling back then. This came to a surprise to me when I was learning about all of this. And one thing that I will pause and say before I get more into it is, I know a lot about the Amiga, but the more research I did, the more I was like, I don't know anything about this. Like, this is really cool. Like, I just kept unearthing like new information, like Dick Van Dyke is a, you know, really well-known graphic visual effects artist, and he's been doing it since he's like in his 50s. And I was like, wait a minute, what? That's like so cool. And he did an animation based on Mary Poppins, and he used software that started on the Amiga. And I thought that was really cool. So I was like, what else can I learn and find out? So the Amiga, I'm going to share some of my notes with you here that I've written down. The Amiga differs from its contemporaries through custom hardware to accelerate graphics and sound, including like sprites, a blitter, 4 channels of the sample-based audio, and that's really important because the audio on the Amiga is like unmatched. It's really amazing, and in fact, a lot of people, you know, from pop music artists to even to today, use the Amiga to create this unique sound that it has. The audio chip is like really amazing. It runs a preemptive multitasking operating system called Amiga OS with a desktop environment called Workbench. And Workbench is that blue, you know, look with the windows, which honestly, if I could change my computer to go back to look like that, I would. Even like Windows 98, like I wish we could like go back to that look, you know, those They're so much nicer, right? These ugly operating systems today, get rid of that. So, if you're wondering who created the Amiga, how did this company even start? Jay Miner, who's the engineer considered the father of the Amiga, and Larry Kaplan formed the development of a company originally called Hi-Toro, which eventually became Amiga Incorporated. And they changed the name from Hi-Toro to Amiga because there was another company in Japan that sounded really similar, and I think they made like lawnmowers or something, and they didn't want to be like associated with that. So they're like, okay, we got to change this, right? And also, if you're wondering, Larry Kaplan, okay, you know, if you're into gaming, you're like, wait, why does that name sound a little familiar? Well, because Larry Kaplan co-founded a little company known as Activision. So that's where, you know, they went on after they were done working with Commodore. So Jay Miner was working for Atari and was approached to work on this new system. But he was kind of hesitant. He was like, I don't really want to do it unless there's like two conditions, right? He was like, it has to be a computer, because at the time, you know, there was a lot of like computing that was going on where they would like market it as a toy or like something for kids. And he was like, I don't want to do that. That's going to be a waste of my time. It had to be like a 1632-bit system built around this really cool chip back then. I didn't know Motorola was like making chips back then, but they were. So he was like, it had to be based on that. And he was like, yeah, it had to be like a computer system. So they founded Hi-Toro, they started working on it. And when they were working on the Amiga, they used code names back then. And the code name that they used was the Lorraine. Because back then they would name computers like after like anybody who's working, like their wife or their girlfriend, because they didn't want people to know what they were talking about. You know, kind of like, oh, somebody's gonna try and steal my idea, which was probably very common back then because it's still common today. So in 1980, with the hardware in hand, you know, that became their sole focus, and then they renamed it the Amiga Corporation. But this is where the trouble starts, way in the beginning. They were having financial problems, and they were acquired by Commodore. So, because sometimes people are confused, like, wait a minute, Commodore used to make their own computers, like the Commodore 64, like, why is this there? And then you got the Amiga, like, I thought that they were, you know, well, yeah, they were like competing computers, but then when they were acquired, yeah, then the Amiga adopted the Commodore name. But they are two different computers. And if you have a Commodore 64, that is also awesome. So, and if you've never played anything on there, you should, because there's lots of cool games on there. So Jay Miner continued to work for Amiga and, you know, did his thing. And, you know, he owned his patents, he owned his IPs. He was like, all right, you know, working, doing all this stuff. But we'll get to this more afterwards. He was starting to get a little frustrated with upper management. They were making some really poor business choices. Like, they were, you know, mismanaging how it should be marketed. They were not really using money all that great. And so he got frustrated and eventually left. So, yeah, that's kind of where the genesis of some of the problems started to happen. But, you know, the spirit of Amiga still lives on in us. So let's talk about why is this thing called the Amiga? Like, why? Why did they pick such a name like this? And as I said before, you know, the naming nomenclature was to call it, you know, like the code name Lorraine, but, you know, they were like, that doesn't got a good ring to it. We want it to sound like something that's gonna be your friend. They literally were like, we want it to sound like something that's soft and gonna be your friend and, you know, be like, I don't know, I guess their companion. So they called it the Amiga. And the Amiga loves you. So how appropriate. You know, welcome home. I don't know who drew that. I just thought it was so funny, and it went with the story that I was trying to tell. And so yeah, they wanted it to have a feminine, soft-sounding name. And if you're wondering, this is actually a piece that was drawn in deluxe paint. So yeah, it had a lot of really beautiful capabilities in terms of colors it could handle. So yeah, that is why it's called the Amiga. And now, let's get into how many different Amiga models were there. So on this image, you'll see about 13, but there were probably about 17-ish models, because even though Amiga company went defunct, there were still some people kind of making things like this, right? Like the Amiga Mini. So that's why I say 17-ish, But here pictured, you'll see the A1000, you'll see in the center here, I know it might be a little bit hard to see, is the Amiga CD32, which that's something if I ever found in the wild, I am going to buy no matter the cost, because it's really, really, really hard to find. And there's some really cool games on there. Although there aren't a lot, there's some really, really cool games on there. And then the taller towers were some of the later models, like the Amiga 3000, the Amiga 4000, which has a lot of strength behind it. But yeah, so there's a lot of versions out there. If you ever see one in the wild, definitely try it out. All right, so this Boing Ball. Anybody who loves the Commodore Amiga knows about this Boing Ball. And the reason why it is so important is because this was one of the very first demos ever created to showcase the real-time capabilities of what the Commodore Amiga could do. So back in 1983, they were creating this prototype for the 1984 the Computer Electronics Show that was being held in Chicago. And at the time, the operating system wasn't ready, but they were, they wanted to show something. They didn't want to just be like, okay, just show the box or whatever, right? They wanted to show something. So they created this demo that ran on the computer. And at the time, it did real-time simulated 3D space smoothly without any lag or any stutter. So this in 1984 was they were literally looking under tables, they were literally looking around saying, this computer is not running that. It was documented to say, they thought this was fake. So they were looking and they didn't find anything. The Amiga really ran this kind of graphics at that time. So like I said, it was really way ahead of its time and really awesome and not appreciated, at least here in America. In Europe, this thing sold I think around 4 million units, but in America it sold I think just under 700,000 units. So that's why finding NTSC version of it is really hard. NTSC is the standard here, where PAL is the standard in Europe, but that's why it's harder to find that version here. So despite being able to do all these cool things, and having all these cool chips and all the great games, why wasn't it a commercial success? Why? For me, I'm oh my gosh, please, somebody keep the Amiga alive. That's why I'm doing this panel here, so I can share the love and we can grow the community and tell people about how awesome it is. So I'm going to tell you why it wasn't such a commercial success. Well, before I get into my list of things that I wrote here, I was you know what, maybe because it didn't print money, it just didn't do everything, right? But, despite that, there was company mismanagement. Unfortunately, as I was saying, Jay Miner himself was really frustrated at the way that upper management was handling everything in the company. So he left, and that was kind of the heart and soul of it, right? There was a lot of easy to pirate software, a lot. Y'all thought that the Dreamcast had it bad? Yeah, this one had it way worse, because literally people would just buy floppies and copy whatever they wanted to copy. And even though that there were piracy Like, sometimes when you're playing a game, like, the game will be like, open up the manual to page 43, and on line 6, column 2, tell us the word that's written there, as like a security measure to make sure that you had like actually bought it. But you know, with BBS and like, so BBS is kind of like forums, like their version of forums back then, you know, people would openly share that information. So yeah, the security measures didn't work. So easy to pirate software meant low sales, meant obviously no profits, or lower profits than they probably wanted. The hardware was very expensive to produce. So imagine in 1980s you're spending somewhere around $1,500 to $1,800 to $2,000 for the computer and any peripherals that you might need, because there's controllers, there's mice, there's, you know, like if you wanted what we'll talk about later, the video toaster and like any other hardware, software to, you know, beef it up. Yeah, that was a lot of money back then. That's still a lot of money today. So, yeah. Not a lot of people bought it, especially when you had cheaper options, like Atari ST, or like an NES, or, you know, whatever, the Sega Master System, whatever gaming hardware was out back then. There was poor marketing. So I'm gonna give you an example. Commodore once had a golden opportunity of getting the Amiga into back then Sears. Rest in peace, Sears. Commodore marketing, they messed it up. Sears wanted to list the Amiga in their catalog, like they do for all of their products, you know, like JCPenney and everybody else had a catalog back then. But Commodore marketing claimed it would make the Amiga look like a toy. So they said no, and they lost a lot of money from business deals similar to that. Because how were people shopping back then? Like, that was the way. So, yeah, a lot of people in management weren't happy about that kind of stuff. And around the launch for when the A1000 was coming out, they missed Christmas. So essentially what happened was, I think somebody maliciously put software on some of the hardware, and they had to do a huge recall because things weren't going to work right. And they realized, like, right as they were about to ship stuff out. So they recalled all of the hardware to fix the error, and then by the time they were ready to send it back out, like, it was like too late. It was like January, February, they missed that window. So yeah, that hurt in the beginning, and all of that money when you're first launching something is like key. So unfortunately, Commodore shut down the Amiga division on April 26, 1994, and filed for bankruptcy 3 days later. So yeah, that's the short history of why it wasn't a commercial success in the United States. I'm going to keep stressing that, because in the UK and in Europe, it actually was much more successful. People had like Commodore computers just as much as they had like a VIC-20 or some of the other really cool vintage computers that are out there, ZX Spectrum and all of that. So is the Amiga still relevant today, despite me telling you all that sad stuff? Yes it is. And I'm going to tell you why. We're going to spend the next the next 20 minutes telling you why, all the cool stuff that I found out while I was doing my research. So let's start with something a little obvious. Haha, that's actually a joke. So I put this picture here, and you're like, Ash, I can't even see it, the projector, it's like so bright, I can't see what's going on in there. Let me just tell you, there's a picture of an Amiga in there. Somewhere, underneath that hand, if that's there. There's a picture of an Amiga. And then you'll see this picture of this really cool screen here. What is that screen showing? It seems like something like music. That's like your second clue to figure out where this Amiga is. But in case you just want me to tell you where I found it, in this really cool, super cool video of Paula Abdul. It was a background prop. That's right, the video Cold Hearted by Paula Abdul. Cold Hearted, look into his eyes. That one. If you don't know it, Spotify, it's a good song. But yeah, the really cool thing, Amiga was like super cool back then for like a hot second. So they put it in the background of lots of really cool movies like City Slickers and some of these other movies that I found images of back from like 1985 to like 1991. So you can often find the Amiga like either a prop in a movie, somebody's doing some dastardly deeds, or maybe they just wanted to look like a cool businessman, you know, like Billy Crystal over here. So yeah, it was in a lot of movies and a lot of props, and I didn't know that. I actually thought that not very many people knew about the Amiga, so when I found all of these movie screens, I was like, wait, that's actually kind of cool. All right, so not only was it a prop, they used them to make movies. So here you're going to see what I'm going to explain in a little bit. The video toaster, and this is an Amiga 4000 with a personal animation recorder. And what you're seeing in this slide is they were using it to do recordings for Titanic. Yeah, Titanic with, Leonardo DiCaprio, which is really, really cool. I had no idea that they use this. And the cool thing about this computer is that they thought it was lost. They thought that somebody just threw it away, got rid of it, and the person who actually worked on the movie, there's this really cool YouTube video of them rediscovering the fact that somebody salvaged the computer and they turned it on and they repaired it, cleaned it out, and then found like all of this footage from Titanic that they thought was lost forever. So that was really, really cool. I thought that was really awesome. They also found footage that they used for Apollo 13, the one with Tom Hanks. I thought that was really cool. And the little arrow right there is showing that Amiga 4000. So they used it for animation. They used it to like capture and render video and utilize it to create visual graphics. So all of that from this really cool computer. So the video toaster, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the video toaster is, but before I start telling you about what the video toaster is, what do you think it has to do with, shut up, Wesley, Wil Wheaton? What does Wil Wheaton have to do, for all my Star Trek fans out there, with the video toaster? Well, this was new information to me as of yesterday. Apparently, Wil Wheaton worked for New Tech, which is the company that created the video toaster. So the video toaster is a combination of hardware and software for editing the production of the NTSC standard definition video. Remember I mentioned before, the United States uses the NTSC and Europe uses PAL. Basically, it's, if I recall correctly, and please somebody let me know if I'm stating this wrong, it's like how many frames per second. So I think like for here in the United States, like the standard is 30, and there's a different standard in Europe, which I think is like a little bit slower. That's why if you... 25, thank you so much. Yeah, so that's why if you run a European game on an American console, it runs like way faster, or it might be the other way around, but thank you for that. So for a few thousand US dollars, just a few thousand US dollars, the hardware and software provided a video editing suite in the early 1990s that rivaled the output of contemporary professional systems that cost 10 times as much. And this is really important because this allowed access to software that was affordable for people to actually be able to do these kinds of things, if you have that kind of money. But for like, like a TV production studio or like a movie production studio, that was a huge cost saving for them. So it made it so that way, like anybody who wanted to create like TV and, like save, maybe they didn't have a big budget because they're like a brand new studio or whatever, like this gave them access in a way that others didn't because it was so expensive and it was actually much easier to use. So the learning curve was lower on this. Other parts of the original software package were spun off as standalone products. Most notably, and this was really cool in my research, Lightwave 3D. So the thing that I love about Lightwave 3D, first of all, it still exists. People still use it. But if you go on their website, they detail the entire history. So you can see like all the way back from like the Amiga and like, you know, everything that they're doing today. And I thought that that was really cool. So I found an excerpt of Will Wheaton. There was an interview where he was talking about like what his experience was like working for this video editing company. He said, "I'm really proud to have been a part of this from the very beginning. We were in the tip sphere of the personal video production, which is what we called it back in that day. I think it was around 1994 when we were doing that, because he did this after his time on Star Trek, which I think he left in like season 5 or 6. I think you can draw almost a straight line between iMovie, Final Cut, all the way to the video toaster. So think about that, the evolution of the video toaster to Final Cut to iMovie. And I always tell people, like, we take that for granted. Like, all that stuff's on our phone in CapCut or iMovie. Like, all that stuff's on our phone, but it drew a line all the way back then. That stuff was not accessible back then. So I just thought that that was really cool and something that we probably just kind of take for granted nowadays. And one of the things that I'm really excited about with Greg and Kim, he asked me to do the gorgeous tiny. Its technology has gotten so advanced and so inexpensive that creative barriers, or rather commercial barriers for creative people, have dropped really low. So after he started working on Next Generation, he worked to develop the Video Toaster 4000 and enhanced version of the Amiga video editing software and hardware used to produce special effects for things like Babylon 5. I was really surprised to learn about this. So the intro to Babylon 5, the first season, pretty much all of those graphics were done on Commodore Amigas. I had no clue about this. And that was really cool. I think they used Amigas up until some portion, very small portion, to season 3. Not as much on season 2, but almost everything on season 1. And they actually won, and the Video Toaster won an Emmy for this in 1993. So the Foundation Imaging, that was the name of the company that did it. Ron Thornton was the person who won the Emmy because he was the one that was in charge of this company. And he was the visual director, and he used it as a cost-effective solution. So basically, they got 24 Commodore Amigas. This was cost-effective at the time for them. 24 Commodore Amiga 2000s, with 16 of them dedicated solely to rendering visuals like this. Each rendering machine was equipped with whopping 32 megabytes of RAM and a Fusion 40 accelerator and video toaster card, making them formidable workhorses in the realm of CGI. You could say that the video toaster is like the genesis of CGI. That might sound generous to some people, but I will say it. I think it's pretty cool. Foundation Imaging's success with Babylon 5 not only showcased the capabilities of the Commodore Amiga, but also highlighted a pivotal moment. So yeah, it meant studios could create, work that's competitively, priced. And it meant that, like, if you know, like, Star Trek, for example. I'm a big Star Trek fan. Shout outs to Star Trek, yeah. You'd know in season 1, like, for example, they had to work, like, and build up. Like, you look at the lighting from season 1, you look at, like, the props from season 1, all the things that they do to, like, hide cords and do all this stuff. Like, they had to build up to what they had eventually looking good in season 3. And that stuff costs a lot of money to film a show like that. So, yeah. Shout outs to making things accessible. One thing that I thought was really cool was somebody tweeted, "Hey, did you edit this video?" And Tony Hawk, yes, Tony Hawk of skateboarding fame, said, "Yes, I made this video of Lords of Thunder for TurboGrafx 16. TurboGrafx 16 is a really, really cool system that had like lots of awesome games on it. And he utilized the Video Toaster to create these sick graphics. Check that out. Whoa, that transition. Look at this. Look at these like wipes you're about to see for this game called Lords of Thunder." What? Like, I had access to doing things like that. That's sick. That's what the Video Toaster could do. So, like, it seems really basic now. You're like, Ash, come on, we could do that in CapCut. That's mad easy. Like, no, but like back then they couldn't. Like that was a really, hard to process thing. You had to have a computer that was strong enough to do it. I just thought that was really cool. Tony Hawk is an Amiga fan. So you should be an Amiga fan too. Thank you for that. All right, so what am I going to show y'all next in the movie and TV graphics portion of this talk? Does this, you probably can't see it that well. Maybe you can. Does this look familiar to you? If it doesn't, that's okay. I got another version here. Can't see it, that's all right. Maybe this might look familiar to you. Ah, the Preview Guide channel, yes. Yes, where all those lo-fi YouTube videos are stealing inspiration to make cool videos like this, right? This was all run on an Amiga. All of this. It's really, really cool. So, making the video integration possible were Amiga 2000s. Native video compositing capabilities, all associated content was provided by the Preview Network, and they used a special satellite, and they used something called analog C-bands to get that information there, and the Amiga 2000 powered the Preview Guide software. So everything that you saw on the bottom of the screen, that was all powered with an Amiga. The more you know. I thought that was really cool. So, what am I going to show you now next? Oh, who's a fan of Nick Arcade? Yes, let's go. We got one fan in here. I was a big fan of Nick Arcade. As a kid who was very much into gaming and loved Nickelodeon, I always wanted to be on this show. And if you're not familiar with Nick Arcade, let me just do a time check here. Okay, we got a nice 20 minutes. Nick Arcade was a game show where there would be two teams of two kids, and you would answer trivia questions. You had to move a character named Mikey across a stage, and on the stage, there were little individual squares, and each time you landed on a square, it gave you like a challenge or maybe some trivia or whatever. And it was really cool. All the graphics that were done on the show were done with Commodore Amigas. I cannot confirm this, but there is some research that says Psygnosis, which is a really cool company that produced a lot of Amiga games, also worked on creating games for them, but I can't confirm that. But if somebody can do research into that, I'd love to learn more. I just didn't have enough time to confirm that, but I hope it's true. At the very least, Psygnosis did make Shadow of the Beast, which is the image in that other second picture there. And they produced a lot of really cool games. But on the Nick Arcade show, not only did they have games that were made by the Amiga and utilized graphics from the Amiga, if you remember, there was like a challenge at the end where the kids were in kind of like this blue screen environment and they had to move around. All of that was done with the Amiga. There was this really, really cool program called Mandala, Amiga Mandala. And again, this is like late 80s, early 90s, where you had technology where you can move, it detected your motion, and you can do things on screen. So if anybody remembers how these games work, like you had to move around and collect the orbs or avoid getting hit with sparks or whatever the enemy was throwing at you, it was all against a blue screen, and they utilized the Amiga Mandala system, which was the gesture technology at that time, a multimedia interactive TV non-immersive virtual reality to achieve this effect. I thought that was really cool. I had no idea about that, because as a kid I was always wondering, how did they do that? Well, now you know. Now you can go out and do your own version of it. So, let's get into some music. You're wondering, who's that group? Well, if you don't know that group, that's Devo. Devo was a very popular band back in the 80s, and they used the Deluxe Paint program on the Amiga to create their album cover. There were a lot of artists who are using Deluxe Paint or versions of that to do album covers, photo shoots, all that kind of stuff. Deluxe Paint was a very robust program, and people still use it to this day. In fact, I've seen some cool art jams and stuff where people are get on Deluxe Paint, submit your stuff, and then they do art jams for the Amiga to this day, which I think is really cool. There's also this really awesome music video called Move Your Feet by Junior Senior. I don't know if anybody knows the song, but it goes, everybody, do 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 do, honey, oh, oh, oh. Yeah, that song. The entire video was done in deluxe paint. Everything, the animations, everything. I just thought that was so cool. Also, look at that visual aesthetic. It's really awesome. So yeah, they did the entire video in deluxe paint, and I wanted to share that with you today because I thought it was awesome. Oh, I have no internet, darn. So that slide, you might be able to see it for a second, yeah, darn, sorry y'all. This was supposed to be Calvin Harris. Calvin Harris, who is a prolific musician nowadays, did his whole entire album in Amiga Tracker. And if I had internet, I'll be able to play you a little sample, but I don't. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to just pretend you hear that music in your head, or look it up later, Shazam it, look it up on Spotify. But a music tracker back then, which is the second photo you see here, is a music sequencer, software for creating music. The music is represented as discrete musical notes positioned to several channels at chronological positions. And the music tracker user interface is number-based. So you can do notes, parameter changes, effects, other commands, and all kinds of really cool stuff with it. So Calvin Harris's 2007 album was created on a 15-year-old Amiga at that time, an A1200. So I thought that was pretty cool. People are still making music to this day. All right, and then speaking of more music, oh wait, maybe we will play. Hold on, let's try. No, it foiled me. Oh, that's all right. Okay. My next musical thing, my last musical thing I want to tell you. Who knows Dire Straits, Money for Nothing, this very famous video. What's up? You got a question?
No, it's just I'm one of the...
Oh, you know it!
I'm familiar with this song and the video.
Right, isn't the video cool?
Yes.
That's not the video we care about today, though. However, wait, I'm going to tell you why I did that. So, Ian Pearson and Gavin Blair created this animation using a Bosch FGS4000 CGI system with something called Qualnell Paintbox system. We just wanted to show you that for reference, but we don't care about that one. This is the one we care about, the Weird Al version. The Weird Al version. So Weird Al, he filmed this UHF video for UHF, right? It was a parody of Money for Nothing. And according to the DVD commentary, he used an Amiga to make this whole video. So there you go. This is the better version. This is the cooler version, because he made it with an Amiga. All right. Art. You might be wondering, why do we see Andy Warhol on the cover of an Amiga magazine? Let me just make sure we do a time check here, so I don't know if there's somebody after me. And I'll just keep yapping about the Amiga forever. So, yes, Andy Warhol did incredible art on the Amiga. You will know his famous Campbell's Soup, the famous Campbell's Soup pop art. He did an Amiga version. And he loved the Amiga. He was enthralled by it. He thought it was one of the coolest things. He also did this portrait of the beautiful Debbie Harry. And the cool thing about this portrait is the diskette that this portrait was on was lost, and they just found it last year. And when they found it and, verified that it was actually by Andy Warhol, it sold for $26 million last year. Yeah, 26 mil. I don't know where that money went, probably to the Andy Warhol Foundation, but I just thought that was really cool that it is still relevant to this day. And here's a self-portrait, and you know he liked Amiga because there it is on an Amiga screen. Look, there's the name Amiga right there. That's his self-portrait. It's really, really cool. So apparently he didn't just do like one piece. He did a lot of work on there. And this piece I want to tell you about. This is actually really cool. My friend that I showed you in that very first big picture, Amiga Bill, actually interviewed this next artist that I'm going to tell you about. Her name is Samia Halabi. She's a Palestinian artist, activist, and scholar and educator based in New York City. She's also known as a pioneer for digital art. So in 1985, Samia, at 50 years old, taught herself how to code, how to do C, how to do BASIC, and she taught herself how to code on an Amiga and create art. So if you ever look at her, like she does traditional art, like acrylic and all that kind of stuff, if you ever look at her stuff, it looks very similar to this. And she started on the Amiga. She said, I'd sit there wondering, what are these things? They're short programs, and she'd like, be like, I'd push a button, create something here, create this, and then she loved it. She said that the shapes and colors unfolded like flowers, they open up, and she loved playing in the space and creating movement. That can be found in the MoMA today. This happened, she put her art up in May of 2025. And I found this article about her, and I thought that was really cool that she is still making art on a Commodore Amiga. So, y'all are next, right? Are y'all next?
Oh no,
You're just chilling? All right, cool. All right, no one's kicking me off the stage yet.
No.
Yeah. We got 2 more slides. We're almost done. Science. Who could be using this in science? Oh, it says NASA. You got that right. You got that right. NASA. Even NASA used the Commodore Amiga. The flexibility, the cost effectiveness for them, it was really, really important. The Commodore Amiga was the right choice for them. They actually tried to use other computer software systems. They tried to use the Mac. They tried to use a few others. And it was really expensive. And when they came to the Amiga, NASA at first said no, they didn't want to use it because they thought the computers were too inexpensive. They were like, wait a minute, something's a little fishy about this. But Gary Jones, principal system engineer at NASA at that time, said it was the right choice for processing launch vehicle telemetry. So they used Commodore Amigas for launch vehicle telemetry in Cape Canaveral. That was really, really cool. I was like, wow. So the first Amiga computers were installed at Hangar AE, which is where they did all that cool stuff at Cape Canaveral. Reports indicate that these machines were used as late as 2006. So yeah. And that computer, where you see the picture of, apparently, I can't confirm this, but they said it went for sale on eBay. I don't know who bought it. Somebody has it, but it exists. That's how I got the picture. They also used the Amiga for creating like molecule slides. So I found this from, what do you call those things? A journal. And they were saying that the Amiga 3000 was nearly ideal for desktop molecular modeling because it used that Motorola chip that I told y'all about, and it had all the right math processing powers and all that stuff, and because it was NTSC compatible, they were able to use this in that particular study that I was reading about. So I just thought that was really cool that you could not only find it in games and entertainment, but you could also find it in science. And the last thing I'm going to go over, because I'm a retro gamer, I love talking about video games. Anybody who's out there who's played, Sega Genesis, Sega Master System, all these really cool games, you might think that some of these games originated on those consoles. Well, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. Zool, Chaos Engine, even the Master System controller was compatible with the Amiga. If you heard about a game called Galahad, no, you didn't, because it's actually called Leander, and it started on the Amiga. All of those games originated on the Amiga, and they are really, really, really cool. So, if you've never played any of those, I implore you to go out and play them, because those are some of my very favorite video games. Well, I must have put that slide twice. Pretend like you didn't see it. So is the Amiga still around? Yes. Yes, it is. These events that I told you about in Silicon Valley, this event where you see all those are all Amiga computers. People bring their Amiga computer, like how they bring stuff to like LANFest and stuff like that, and they gather and they make demo scenes, which is like really cool music videos using like Amiga animation, and they make music, and they do game jams, and they do art jams, and they do all kinds of cool stuff. And like I said, Amiga 40 is happening in Germany. And people meet and play Amiga games all over. I'm one of them on Twitch.tv, which is where you can find me, right there. That's me playing Dungeon Master, one of my favorite video games of all time. It's a first-person dungeon crawler that kind of started the genre, and it's really challenging, but super satisfying if you ever get to beat it. So, that's the end of my talk. I hope you enjoyed. Special thanks to all the people that helped me do the research for this Nostalgia Nerd Amiga Bill, the Amiga community, and I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me talk about the Commodore Amiga. There you go. And if you decide to come to my stream, tell me what Amiga game you have played today, because I would love to know. No, thank you. Thank you so much.